Early claim settlements are a valuable tool to helping the employer control their overall claims cost and their cost of insurance.
Welcome to the Self-Insurance Podcast brought to you by CRMBC. Today, we're joined by Randy Bugg, Senior Vice President of Pacific Claims Management. Today, we're talking about early claims settlement. Hi, Randy. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today, we're going to talk about the importance of early claims settlement. Give us, first, before we dive in, tell us a little bit about you and your experience in work comp.
Well, thank you. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you again. My name, again, is Randy Bugg, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Pacific Claims Management. We founded Pacific Claims Management. I was one of the founders here back in 2011. My experience in the claims industry, workers' compensation, spans 34 years now. It's hard to believe, but time goes very fast. I started when I was 19 years old in the mailroom, and I've worked in all facets and all positions in claims management. And I'm just very honored and happy now to be working and helping self-insured employers to better their claims outcomes and their overall programs.
This is a perfect segue. So from a claims perspective, let's give us a high-level overview of what are the objectives for a TPA that, like you are our TPA. What are the primary objectives of a TPA in a workers' comp system?
Well, there's really two overall objectives, and one is providing benefits, due benefits to the injured worker, timely, expeditiously, and helping that injured worker return back to the employer workforce. The other one, from a claims standpoint, is controlling the overall costs of those losses as well for the employer.
And we talk a lot about early settlement. Tell us what you mean by that.
So a lot of times, a claim, unfortunately, in our system here in California, there are attorneys involved. Sometimes the claim comes in and it's already litigated before an employer knows about it. And when we evaluate, the claim and, the complaint, if you will, and its merits, a lot of times it makes sense to try to offer an early settlement, considering how long the claim may stay open and what the costs involved may be in terms of, actual administration of benefits or defense costs and things like that. So you end up really looking at an early settlement as a way of controlling those costs and even a lot of times returning the employee back to the labor market.
And I know we talk about that. So what it seems obvious, but let's spell it out. What are the benefits to an employer of early claims resolution?
Well, again, it shortens the lifespan, reduces costs, saves on litigation costs, and reduces, sort of the administrative end of it as well for an employer, because they're oftentimes pulled into, a lot of the things that we need as a claims administrator. And so, again, it saves them time and money as well to have the claim off the books. Also, a lot of times, if a claim stays open, the growth from year one to year two in terms of overall cost it's exponential. And so if they could avoid that, of course, that's better for their overall claims experience and better when it comes time to possibly renew or look at the costs of their insurance on an annual basis.
And a lot of these things, as far as when a claim is settled, is outside of the hands of the employer, and it's really in the hands of our TPA, our legal panel. But this podcast is really for our members. And so what can a member do to help in this process?
Well, that's a great question. I have to think about that one for just a second. But, in terms of what an employer can do, I think it's key to point out that, especially with the CRMBC membership, our staff here reaches out. We discuss every settlement with the member. We discuss the good, the bad, the what's and the whys. So a lot of times the member has that buy-in as a self-insured entity, in that process. And so, at times they may have a valued employee that they want to return quickly. Other times, when it comes to the litigation process, this may be a way to bring some kind of final resolution to everyone involved, the employer and the injured worker in this case.
Now, obviously in our world, we see some claims that settle really quickly. We see some claims that take a year. We see some claims that take many years. What's the difference? I know it's not apples to apples ever, but what are some of the key differences between a claim that gets settled quickly and one that just drags on and on and on?
Well, a lot of times one of the big keys is sort of that employer-employee relationship coming into the claims process. Unfortunately, if there are issues in that relationship, a lot of times we'll see, possibly protracted litigation. Sometimes what we'll also look for in terms of the applicant, if you will, because we're talking about litigated claims, and so sometimes we refer to them, the injured worker, as the applicant. We look to see, if there's any motivation for any kind of, secondary gain, if there's any type of, possible, fraudulent, suspicions or, things that may need investigation. Those things can protract the discovery process. And then you get into, of course, needing med legals or QME evaluations that are very time consuming and very costly. And that's where you'll see the claim start to take maybe a year to 2 years to resolve, rather than one that might be able to be resolved immediately.
And lest one of our members thinks it's no big deal for a claim to go on and on, tell us a little bit about what happens when a claim drags on.
Well, when a claim drags on and on, the costs just pile up. And in fact, we took a look at some of, even CRMBC's own data, some of the members, that we've been working with now for some time. And we see about a 76 growth in the overall costs when a claim is going into year 2. And about another 10% after year 3. It doesn't really level off until the 4th and 5th year. And at that point, a lot of times the damage is done.
And this is something that sometimes it can't be avoided, but more often than not, there are things that we have seen that can avoid it. These protracted, out of control claims. One of them that we've talked about quite often it seems like it's unrelated, but it's really not. And that's a return to work plan. Can you talk to us a little bit about return to work?
Yeah, a good return to work plan really can help. If you can, you have a valued employee, and the last thing that they wanted when they came to work was to be injured. And so if you're able to return them back to the workplace, at the earliest opportunity, it does a couple of things. From a psychological standpoint, it helps us, to feel more productive. For a lot of, and I'll include myself in this, a lot of us, the workplace is a big part of our life, right? And so being a part of that, it's a big part of our identity. And so having that person continuously there in that environment with the employer helps the healing process. It really does. And so those are some of the reasons that I would encourage return to work. But you also have to look at things, kind of the cliche in my industry is case by case basis, right? Because again, I alluded to that employer-employee relationship. Unfortunately, not all relationships are great, just like, not all marriages are great. And so, you really have to evaluate, things and make sure that it's really to a benefit, to bring this person back in. And maybe they need a little bit more time, to heal. Maybe they need a little bit more time, or maybe there's other extenuating circumstances. So, again, we're a big believer in return to work. It saves on your identity costs. Again, that, has an impact on claims experience. But it should be, something that's looked at with a lot of consideration on both sides.
And you gave one side of it, which is the legitimate injured worker that really doesn't want to be injured and stay home. But the unfortunate reality is there is a lot of fraud in work comp. And so we find that having a return to work kind of helps deal with someone who is, just trying to file a claim and collect a check. So tell us about that side of return to work.
Well, that's, again, why you want to be selective and you want to be very considerate, with your return to work program. We have seen, unfortunately, where, an employee can become or is sort of a poison pill, right? And so what you don't want to do is instill a culture of where workers' comp starts to be looked at as a method for easy gain, right? And so when you say legitimately injured, yes. A lot of times, somebody can be legitimately injured and then it turns into something else. Or sometimes you have, like I say, an employee who may be disgruntled or maybe, filing a claim in retaliation. Those are definitely situations you don't want to reintroduce into, the employer environment prematurely.
And now let's talk a little bit about settlements. There's a couple of different ways that we settle work comp claims. Specifically, I want you to give us a high level of the different types of settlement, but then I want you to talk a little bit about CNR settlements and the impact that has on the overall workforce.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of different ways, and one is kind of what we've always referred to from a layman's perspective is a future medical claim. And really what a future medical claim is, it's where we enter into a stipulated award. All settlements have to be approved by a workers' compensation appeals board judge. And so even in an unrepresented case, we can enter into a stipulation where we stipulate that a person may have, a certain level of permanent disability, for example. In exchange, we also leave open their ability to treat into the future according to the medical record at the time. So that's what we call stipulated award with future medical. And that's awarded by a judge. We stipulated the PD. The other method, and really kind of what we're talking about today, is the compromise and release, the CNR. That's the lump sum. What a lot of people outside of the claims industry don't realize is you can CNR any one benefit. If you have a dispute regarding, say, temporary disability, you can compromise and release that issue. Or you can compromise and release just indemnity and leaving medical open. Now, you rarely see that. And usually what we're talking about when we talk about CNR is the entire claim, the medical aspect and the indemnity aspect. And that's the primary vehicle for early settlement. That's what you want to do. You want to resolve the claim in its entirety at the least amount or least cost possible. And that's when you start looking into, again, sort of the inside baseball of claims. We start calling those nuisance value settlements. And it used to be back in the early 2000s, nuisance value settlements were just that, anywhere from $500 to, $5,000. If the claim had issues regarding compensability, but it was litigated, we knew that we would spend, a year or two fighting out those issues. We know that the costs associated are in the, sometimes the tens of thousands. It makes sense to get that CNR for $5,000. Now we fast forward to 2026. And as we know, inflation has been everywhere, sort of just compounding. Well, workers' comp is no different. And medical inflation is very much a real thing in the workers' comp industry as well. So we see a lot of, medical legal evaluations, qualified medical evaluations. We call them medical legals because those carry weight and evidence. And those evaluations are going anywhere on the low side from $2,500 a piece, sometimes to over $5,000 per evaluation. And unfortunately, because of the way that the system has been working a lot recently, sometimes we need to go back to that QME 2, maybe even 3 times, and maybe even depose. And the average deposition fee just for an applicant's attorney is anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 just for their fee alone for showing up at the deposition. So we can see that these costs add up very quickly, which is the reason why the CNR is the desired or ultimate vehicle to keep the costs down.
Now, you said a word in there that I want to make sure that we define for people. When you're talking about medical inflation, what are you referring to?
I'm talking about the cost of not just the day-to-day treatment with a primary care physician for the injury, but also the diagnostics have increased. The actual fees to a qualified medical evaluator or an agreed medical evaluator have increased substantially within the last 3 years. There were some changes to the law that actually allowed for med legal evaluators to bill by the page for record review, and that increased the cost almost double overnight for the cost of these evaluations.
And what are the takeaways that you can give to our members and our audience about what can, at the restaurant level, what are a couple of things that the restaurant owner, operator, managers can do to help in this fight that we have to keep claims from dragging on?
Mm-hmm. The documentation at the onset, of the injury, If there are any, like I say, sort of extenuating circumstances affecting the relationship with the employee, say disciplinary actions, things like that. One of the biggest, most valuable tools, especially within the group membership, has been video of the sort of the back and the front, because you want to cover all angles as much as possible. That video has been absolutely tremendous. So that would definitely be my recommendation. Also, one of the biggest things for the employer that we experience is understanding the weight of evidence. There's a lot of claims that, a lot of us don't necessarily feel good about. Maybe they were unwitnessed, or maybe, there's just certain things surrounding the claim itself that don't seem right. But we have to be able to prove that in court. And if we're not able to do that, if we don't have that evidence, or maybe there's employers that are being called as witnesses, if we don't have those witnesses lined up, we don't have that evidence, the likelihood that this claim is going to be deemed compensable by a judge is very, very high. And we all maybe feel in our gut that, maybe this didn't happen as it was said to us that the employee is saying. But again, we have to be able to prove that. And so when you're looking at an early settlement opportunity, you really need to take a hard look to say, okay, can I actually prove this in court, this defense maybe, or this feeling that, this is being falsified somehow. It's got to be more than a feeling.
Randy, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, we work very closely because you are CRMBC's third-party claims administrator, and I appreciate your time. Before we go, can you give us just a one-sentence summary explaining to employers why it is so important for early claim settlement?
Early claim settlements are a valuable tool to helping the employer control their overall claims cost and their cost of insurance.
And how about 3 things one of our restaurant operators can do this week to assist you in doing your job?
Communicate, consider us a part of your team. We are really here, as an extension of your human resources, at the employer level. Also the documentation, please, if you can gather any documentation or potential witnesses, video, things like that, extremely valuable to the claims handling process. And don't hesitate to ask questions. Make sure that, anything, no matter how small, ask it. And we're here to answer it for you and help give you the information that you need in your day-to-day operation.
Thank you so much, Randy. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
For more webinar sessions and resources, visit crmbc.com. And if you have an idea for a future topic, email us at info@crmbc.com.